Thank you very much, Emiliano. Thanks everybody for your exceptional patience. I cannot see you, but I can hear you, so you can just interrupt me if there's a question or a remark. And I will try to speed up my presentation, of course, so that there is some time for discussion, hopefully, if you manage to hang on. So I'm a professor in the economics of international financial development. I've done much work over the last 10 to 15 years on the link between financial development, so the expansion of credit and of financial markets, and the impacts on financial instability, of course, financial crises, but also economic growth and inequality in income distributions. And so now I'm turning my attention to sustainable finance, which is a new area for me, but many of the same issues that are relevant for the questions about financial development and economic development are relevant for sustainable finance. And I think there is a lot we can learn from that existing conversation on financial development. So let me see. Yeah. The background is that this is a regression table. It's a sort of work that is going on now in the economics of sustainable finance, trying to find correlations and causations from the expansion of sustainable finance, such as green bond markets and lower emissions. And this is from work that I'm now doing with a research student. And it's very hard to find statistical evidence, quantitative evidence of correlations, let alone causation, from the expansion of sustainable finance to lower emissions by the firms who are issuing green bonds. So on a very granular level, even, it is very hard to find that sort of evidence. One response might be we just need to keep looking harder. Another response might be to reflect on the nature of finance and what we expect from it. And that's what I do here. What is sustainable finance? What do we mean there? And what is the conceptual challenge? And I will suggest that the challenge is that capitalism is monetary and financial capitalism. And I'll say a bit more about that, of course. One of the inspirations for doing this paper was the Conference of the Parties in Edinburgh, wasn't it? Where Mark Carney presented the coalition, the Net Zero Coalition, a coalition of the biggest asset owners and financial firms in the world who pledged many billions of dollars for sustainable finance. That this was 2021, October 2021. By now, this coalition has fallen apart. But the idea was that up until today, this is what Mark Carney said in the speech there, up until today, there was not enough money in the world to fund the transition. This is a watershed, so October 21. The core message today is that the money is there for the transition. And Mark Carney, of course, has been governor of the Bank of England. He's a financially very prominent person. And the idea behind this is that there used to be not enough money for the transition, or as soon as we mobilize enough money, the transition can happen. It's a bottleneck. And that's a very common idea, but also a very, very contestable idea in the debate on financial development and economic development. So I want to analyze this sustainable finance debate, drawing on the financial development debate, and rethink the relations between finance, money, and investment. And hopefully that will lead to some implications for the effective use of sustainable finance. This brings together various literatures, critical macrofinance, Gabor and Tooze notably, but also others, so-called money view research by Meerling and others that are probably familiar to you as well, Benjamin Brown among them, Kai Koddenbrock, and post-Keynesian monetary economics and macroeconomics, which draws on Marx and Keynes and Schumpeter, a synthesis really of Marx, Keynes, and Schumpeter's and Galecki's macroeconomics. The structure of the paper is that I will first point out that there is a double coincidence assumption, and then I will proceed. Let me just start with this double coincidence assumption, and that's the idea that when we say we need money for the sustainable transition, the idea is we need private finance, and the idea is that if private finance is mobilized, that will lead to investment. So let me try to deconstruct this double coincidence assumption. So the coincidence of money with private finance and the coincidence of private finance with investment. And when I say investment, I don't mean financial investment, but I mean tangible capital goods investment, like machines and robots, windmills and solar panels. Underlying this double coincidence idea is that the purpose of the global financial system is to allocate the world's savings, and several other quotes here give the key idea behind this, which is also pictured in this picture. And this is actually a picture taken from the document that explains the reason for the latest Nobel Prize in economics, which went to Ben Bernanke, among others, the quite famous former chairman of the Federal Reserve. And Bernanke and his co-laureate, Diamond, they picture the financial sector as a place, that's the circle, the financial sector, as a place where people bring their money, and this is then transformed, maturity transformation, into tangible capital goods, right? So a sort of channel from savings to physical change. Now, for physical change is what we need in the sustainability transition, at least when we look at climate and biodiversity. And so here's a question: Does financial investment lead to physical change, and what are the assumptions on the mechanism underlying that? It's still very much an idea out there, and an idea even which receives Nobel Prizes. What is the problem with this idea? So let me move away from the first part of this double coincidence assumption that money is private finance, and the second part that private finance lead to investment, both of which we saw in the picture. Let me move to another framework of thinking about finance and change, sustainable finance, which is the critical macrofinance framework. And here I'm going to yield on to draw on several relations that have been developed in post-Keynesian economics, and there isn't the time to discuss them all in any detail, or even to discuss all of them. But let me just highlight in the macro area, the recognition is that it's public plus private investment that leads to aggregate profit. So if you want to have economic change in capitalism, which is driven by profit-seeking enterprises, you need to have public and private investments, including treasury spending. You need to have effective demand and expectations that are such that private entrepreneurs can expect to make a profit. So private entrepreneurs depend on effective demand and expectations, which are managed by treasuries and governments. And a very important role is that central bank operations must support yields, so the return on capital, and must support sufficient capital gains. Together, this is total gains that financial investors make. So that's the macro side. On the finance side, it's important to recognize that money is endogenous, meaning that money cannot be injected into the economic system from outside, but it's something that emerges between banks and their clients. Second, it's important to recognize that finance is hierarchical. So there is money, but there's also other forms of finance, and money and other forms of finance are fungible. They can be exchanged for each other. And this continuous exchange of money for other assets is what defines the financial sector. And this leads to financial innovation, such as derivatives. It also leads to instability, and it leads to financial slippage, which means faster growth of financial assets and liabilities than real investments. I'm going to skip a few here. I'm also going to skip the beautiful picture with many arrows that I've got in the paper that we've got in the paper to illustrate this in the interest of time, and also because it's not really easy for you to read this. It's not really legible. But thinking in this framework, and I've only been able to highlight a few elements of the framework, we can start thinking about why this double coincidence fails. Why, in the first place, money is not finance, the first leg of this double coincidence. Okay, I'm just gonna make this one statement here and not dig deeper into this. And it's a statement that I already made, is that money is just one form of finance. It's the most liquid form of finance that we have, but there are many other forms of finance. So when we save for our pension, the money goes to our pension funds. That is finance, but it's not an increase in money. It is an increase in all sorts of financial assets and liabilities, which are managed by, for instance, BlackRock and State Street and other asset managers, but it doesn't necessarily lead to more money. So when Mark Carney said the money is there for the transition, he really meant, and of course he knew that as a finance professional, the finance is there for the transition, because it was BlackRock and others who were promising to dedicate their assets to the sustainable transition. But once this is recognized, we get to the second part of the double coincidence fallacy, I would say. And that is, once we recognize that money is not finance, it's also true that finance is not investment. So there's a lot of financial assets and liabilities, but there's not a corresponding increase in economic development or economic change or sustainability change. Banks, when they create money, can pour it either into things that increase economic development, such as building factories or supporting the service sector on the top of this picture, but they can also pour it into mortgages, which supports rising house prices in the first place, or in the financial markets, which supports rising asset prices. So I'm even teaching about this, and you can see the week numbers in which I talk about these issues. So money is not finance, and money finance is not necessarily leading to economic development either. I have some evidence to show you. This is for the United Kingdom, and you can see from 1995 until 2018, the green bars is the total of finance. So it's adding up shares, other equity, debt securities, and loans. So financial assets and liabilities added up. And you can see that in billions of British pounds, this is increasing very steeply, of course, until 2007, and then it's plateauing. But the total value of produced non-financial assets, that's the blue line, that's capital, that's tangible capital, machines and robots and so on. It's also increasing, but only very gently, and certainly not at a level or with a slope of the increase in financial assets. So that is financial slippage. Mobilizing finance does not mean that anything's changing in the real world of tangible investments. Okay, Emiliano, how long do I have?
I mean, we have time. I mean,
okay.
So
okay. Okay. Well, I've just touched on the element of an alternative way of thinking about the relation between money, finance, and investment. I'm really sorry that I don't have the time to go into the logical structure of that framework, but it's described in the paper, of course. If there is time, we can talk about it more. But the upshot is that instead of starting from the presumption that money is equal to private finance, so if we need money for the transition, we need to mobilize private finance for the position. We need to, for the transition, we need to recognize that money is a form of finance. There's also many other forms of finance. And this is rooted in the hierarchy of money and in the recognition that not all finance leads to spending. We really care about spending on investment and not in amassing financial assets and liabilities, which don't lead to spending, which may just lead to more wealth and more debt. The second leg of the coincidence is that private finance is equal to investment. That's not true either, because finance outgrows investment. And actually, it's Minsky's theory, Hyman Minsky's theory of financial instability, which implies that there will be faster growth of finance than growth of tangible investments. But let's start with the distinction between real and financial investment. Financial investment being the net acquisition of financial asset, and we've seen in an illustration here that financial investment, the growth of financial assets and liabilities, is far larger, both in its growth rate and its level, than real investment. And therefore, this is a process that leads to not only endogenous instability, that leads to crises. This is now well recognized since the financial crisis of 2007 and 8. But we still need to begin to recognize that it leads to financial slippage, that there's too much assets and liabilities in the world for this to be a reliable instrument to steer or to influence real assets with. It's like pushing on a string. A second recognition here, deconstructing the idea that private finance equals investment, is that private finance in the first place requires public finance. So it's deficit spending by the government, which monetizes companies' profit. Now, this may be going a bit fast, but that's a key insight by Keynes and by Kalecki. And second, that public investment itself is also a source of investment. And moreover, that public investment supports private finance, not just by monetizing profit, but also by managing investor sentiments. And we've seen central banks doing this in quantitative easing programs, managing investor sentiments. Unless they do that, also the sustainability transition financially is not going to be successful. And finally, if we go, this links to my previous slide, my previous slide said, what is the theory behind this? And I picked that up in my last slide. The theory behind this suggests several things. So this is the so what part of the paper. Starting from let's say the conventional framework of the way of thinking about money, that money is a bottleneck, we need to mobilize private finance. Then this is a watershed, as Mark Carney said in my first slide. Now the sustainability transition is possible. Moving away from this framework, deconstructing it, if you like, to a critical macrofinance framework. We are in a different theoretical world, and that different theoretical world has practical implications. For instance, we need to target high hierarchy assets. So if we want to make finance available for sustainability spending, for, let's say, windmills and solar panels and hydrogen, whatever, it's probably not a good idea to start fostering derivatives markets for loans that can support spending for solar panels or whatever. So then you're twice removed from the actual physical action, and there is a lot of slippage in between. Second, it may be useful also for this reason to regulate lower hierarchy financial innovation. So for instance, the derivatives, the credit default swaps, or the mortgage-backed securities, the asset-backed securities that are leading to a lot of growth of financial assets and liabilities, but which are not only indirectly connected to real tangible investment. And third, it speaks for public investment because that's less financialized. Public investment, whatever we may say against it in terms of politicization, it does have a direct link between the tangible investment and the spending. When there's deficit spending by the government, by ministries of economic affairs, it's directly affecting physical change in building windmills or solar panels or whatever. So the financial slippage is much less of a problem if it doesn't happen through private financial markets. Okay, I think I'm not going to talk you through the other implications. We can discuss them in the discussion. I think it's really time for you to let me know what you think of this paper. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you very much, Dirk, for your very interesting talk, and it's very stimulating. And I think we can now open the debate. And so there are questions. You can speak directly in the video. I mean, I have questions, so probably I'll try to break the ice. And so yeah, my question is about the transition. So you were highlighting the problem of the transition to sustainable finance, and so my question is about the time windows that we should have to fund this transition, in the sense that putting all the money and our financial resources into ESG, maybe it's not a good idea in the sense that we need time to disinvest from non-ESG assets into ESG assets, because otherwise you could help speculation from people not interested in ESG assets. So what do you think about it? And
yeah. So when we apply this question to link it to the question that I'm addressing in my paper, what can we expect from private finance? And I'm mostly deconstructive there, that tempering the expectations, because I think that's important. Also in this respect, we should really temper expectations of what private finance can achieve in terms of decreasing emissions and decreasing fossil fuel activity, because that's what's needed. Capitalism in general, but the financial sector in particular, is good at expansion, not at restricting something. So in that sense, public sector-led restriction of fossil fuel activities is likely to be much more effective, and we have historical examples of that, of course. That is one thing I would want to say. And the other thing is that in terms of you spoke about the time window, so things really need to start moving, or moving faster. If you look at the enormous amounts of financial assets which are supposed to direct tangible change, you can see that there's a lot of slippage, a lot of room for changes in financial markets that do not translate into changes in the tangible world of emissions and production processes. So that speaks against working through the private financial markets because they have ballooned so completely out of proportion, and because they have produced so many assets which are not directly linked to production processes. So I think there are two reasons to be cautious about the effectiveness of private finance to cause substantial change in a short time window.
So thank you, Dirk. We have a question from Jasmine. Thank you, Jasmine, for being here today with us.
Hi, thank you. And thank you for the concise, but still very interesting talk. I'm wondering how you think of the EU Sustainable Finance directives, and how, I guess, if you see that as an example of good regulations that help to promote the best of private finance, or maybe their focus on disclosure being not where we should target regulations, and the combination of public-private discussion on sustainable finance.
Yeah, but that's a hard one. the more I study the private sustainable finance world, the less optimistic I become about it. The examples of successful, effective, sustainable finance spending are all examples of quite small scale activity where, usually smaller banks are closely involved, closely engaged with the entrepreneurs or the producers who are doing the actual change. And it's difficult to see how this can be scaled up quickly. And because we need large scale change, therefore, I think there is a sort of mismatch between the logic of private finance change and the scale at which it needs to happen.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine and Dirk. We have also Oline. So thank you, Oline, for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for a very provocative talk and paper. There's some questions that come to mind if you give this fairly negative appraisal of say sustainable finance regulation. Now, in some sense, I find it really difficult to see why, in an extreme case, this would also lead you to a negative conclusion. Suppose that there's a policy that every bank or other funder would use, namely no longer to invest in stuff that is bad and only to extend loans to things that are good, then wouldn't that help?
Yeah.
Or is the problem that because of this financial slippage, the impact of this sort of is of course a very black-white sort of almost categorical imperative Kantian approach, or is the effect going to be so small because of the fact that there is this slippage that you illustrated by this wonderful graph with green bars and a few lines?
So you're asking two questions, if I hear you right.
Yeah, I'm asking two questions. So where in the green bar, black line figure is the problem really located? And what alternatives are we considering when you tell us that you are pessimistic about sustainable finance?
Yeah, so the problem is, the answer to the first question is twofold. The problem is two things. It's the length of those green bars, which mean that any green finance may end up in the green bars and may end up not affecting any material change. And we know this for other kinds of innovation and growth. It's well recognized now by economists who study the process of financial development that this process has disconnected from real developments, and this is equally true for sustainability enhancing economic activities. That is one. So that's one reason to be not too optimistic about the growth of sustainable finance. But the second part of the answer is, of course, it's true that if we block financing for fossil fuel related activities, if we can, to the extent that we can, that will reduce it. But that's not the business of sustainable finance. It's not to block things, it's to finance things. And blocking things is something that public authorities do. Now you might say, but of course also pension funds and so on are blocking things. They are de-investing from some sectors. But unless that is 100%, that's not going to work. There will always be sufficient finance for brown activities somewhere else. Given the enormous scale of the available financial resources in the global financial markets. and therefore a more realistic expectation of how a financial structure would look like that supports the sustainability transition is with clear top-down public guidelines and public investment, which will, in all probability, and we have examples of that also, which will crowd in private investment. So it's not to say that there is no role for private investment, but the private financial investment cannot be a leading sector in this.
But then shouldn't you say that maybe sustainable finance might play that supporting role, right? I mean, when Mark Carney said there is money enough, was he saying that money would be sufficient? Or was he saying that maybe money is necessary and it is available? So
Yeah.
in what sense do you, I mean, your co-author is representing a bank that really believes that if everyone acted like them, the world would be a greener place.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that is then too optimistic, because there will always be non-banks who are going to finance fossil fuel and other allegedly bad activities.
Yeah.
But don't we? But to what extent could you modify your thesis, or to what extent would you be willing to modify the claim and say, if there is a decent governmental support in place, then we would need this and this and this from finance?
Well, the first thing is the recognition that what you said, that the assumption that finance is necessary, that there needs to be enough money, that this is false. There is enough money. There is more than enough money in the world, and in companies that need to make investment, they are not short of cash or short of liquidity or short of the ability to obtain finance if they want to. So the bottleneck is not finance, but the bottleneck is a vision and long-term certainty for investments, so that the investments are made and so on. And once that certainty is there for a decent return, there is no shortage of finance to do it. And then the question shifts from how do we mobilize finance to how is a vision created and how are rules enforced and so on. And those are typically public sector activities. And so from the logic of, rather from the theory of how we know that the financial sector works, the theory of endogenous money, we can also conclude that there is no shortage of money. Money is a social construct. And in the current constellation, the world is awash with liquidity.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, there's a question from Melissa Vergara Fernandez. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I'm outside, so.
Yeah, we can
Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
All right, brilliant, thank you. Okay, thank you so much for that talk. That's really very interesting and certainly very thought-provoking. I really like also the bringing together the Minskian and all these approaches, so that's really valuable. I have two questions. So the first one would be, one of the things that I've been noticing is, or at least something that has struck me, is in the way in which we have been measuring, right? Or this idea that it's unclear whenever we are actually investing in green stuff, right? So recently there was this announcement about how a lot of the European funds that supposedly are investing in like the greenest possible funds are actually also investing in gray funds. And so that is something that I see that, and the way I have thought about it is, this is a problem of measurement, right? And getting right what are those dirty industries, scope 1, scope 3, scope 2, scope 3, that kind of thing. And I was wondering whether you would say that this is something that is separate from the problem that you are posing to us, right? or is this something that is, I don't know, if part of this slushing that could be, say, disguised, right? Because we see this money being used not for these tangible things that we would like to be considered green. So that is my first question. I don't know if you want to answer that one first. Yeah.
Yeah. Shall I? So you're saying measurement is the problem? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Measurement is the problem, but also you mentioned a case where it came out that so-called green activities are actually financing brown activities. Now, so the current drive in the sustainable finance debate is all about measurement and information and transparency and more reporting and creating better metrics and so on. That won't. My claim is the implication of this paper is that won't solve the problem. So even if we have all the information, the complexity of the financial world itself is such that we don't know exactly what we are investing in, whether it's sustainable or non-sustainable activities. We don't really know that. Consider the case of no. Let me stop here. So it's the complexity of the financial world itself, which through Minsky's theory, financial slippage, that's sort of a built-in growing complexity in the financial sector. You don't. This is what you naturally get if you give it free rein. So it's hopeless to start measuring things accurately in a world which by itself is becoming increasingly complex if you let it grow. That would be my response. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. And my second question, maybe I don't know if it's I don't know if provocative, and maybe you might say that I should ask this to your co-author, but maybe you're more keen on saying something more interesting, and that is, I wonder what the position of your co-author is in this whole business, right? Because he's a part of Triodos, which is one of these banks that are kind of trying to push this agenda of, if you invest in green stuff, then this is how you are actually going to, to be able to get to successfully transition to green energy. So I'm wondering what would, isn't that kind of uncomfortable to come up with this research from the position of kind of representing Triodos?
Thank you. I cannot speak for Hans, of course, but still I will. Of course, we've discussed this actually, but I'm also not going to advocate Triodos Bank or any other particular bank. Of course, I have no special interest there.
Sure.
But actually, so Hans actually agrees that it's probably better to cut out as much financial complexity as possible in thinking about financing sustainable actions. So, for instance, green bonds is not something that he would favor, and he's not alone in that. Also, many economists from larger banks, recognize that much of this is not effective if it's not greenwashing. It's simply not effective, and it cannot be. So the point of the paper is to argue theoretically why it cannot be effective to a large extent. And that's one thing about reducing the complexity and the expectations that we have from large and complex financial markets. And the second point about the necessity of a leading role for the public sector to provide the vision and the investments that crowd in private investment. Actually, Hans would also agree with that. And many entrepreneurs and financiers are actually begging governments to come up with clear long-term plans, because then they're happy to invest. So it's not so iconoclastic.
So thank you. And thank you, Dirk. We have another question coming from Richard Endorfer. So thank you, Richard.
Hi. Thank you so much for your really interesting talk, Dirk. Sorry, the light is a little bit off. It's very dark here in Gothenburg. On to my question, really quickly, just the following. So you've mentioned that private funding might, have some degree of slippage and might not be particularly effective in bringing about a green transition. I'm really sympathetic to that idea. I think that sounds very plausible to me, but let me just play the devil's advocate and ask, well, you've also said that to some degree we will also need public funding. But public funding obviously also has its own version of slippage, right? Some people might think that, the government is just not great at finding out which particular companies to invest in. They might not be great in finding out which particular technologies to invest in for the future, and so on and so forth. So this is its own version of slippage, right? Should we be less worried about this than about slippage in when it comes to private funding? Is that your claim? Thank you.
Yeah. So I think there are two reasons to favor a stronger role for the public sector. The first is that indeed financial slippage will be less. As I emphasized, public spending is more directly connected to change on the ground than investment in financial markets, who invested in funds which invested in index invest and so on. So that sort of thing is not present with government deficit spending, whatever its disadvantages may be. That's one reason. And the other reason is why public spending is important is once we've agreed that there's enough money in the world, money is not the bottleneck, the world is awash with liquidity, then what is the bottleneck? And then once the answer to that, accepted answer to that would be, it is a long-term vision, it's agreement on what needs to be done, then there is only one actor in the economy who can start doing the things that are necessary and solve the coordination problems, and that's the public sector. This is an argument from development economics that private investors, when a new market needs to be created, it's not a question of making marginal changes, but of creating a new economic system, a new economic structure. That's typically not done by private actors because they're waiting on each other. Their profit depends on the other guy also making the investment, right? So you need a higher level actor to solve those coordination problems, to make the first investment, which may not have to be very large, or even to underwrite investments, to crowd in private investment. That's basically Mariana Mazzucato's argument for why public/private action is absolutely necessary, and why the entrepreneurial state, as she called it in her 2014 book, is necessary. So it's not the state versus market dichotomy, it's the entrepreneurial state. There are entrepreneurial steps that need to be taken, doing brand new things, creating new markets, and the only actor who is in a position, who has the capabilities to take that first step is the state, is the public sector.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, thank you, Dirk. And I don't see other questions. Maybe I have another question if we have time, and maybe it's a more philosophical question. And do you have in mind a particular definition of sustainable finance, or do you think that we need a different or particular definition of sustainable finance? I don't know. It's because most of the time regulations comes from a specific definition. So maybe changing the definition can affect the regulation. So I don't know what you think about it.
Yes, the definition of sustainable finance that I would favor is so sustainable finance is finance which is directed at the actual change that we want to see. So is directed at means, I don't say it's causing, because I think finance is never causing, it's not is not the bottleneck, so it's not causing the change itself. It's facilitating, supporting that. And it's directed at the actual change we want to see. So we really have to be innovative in finding new metrics that link investment and spending to tangible change, like emissions or social change metrics. Not to an index. So ESG indices are not the actual change often. Not to a financial product, like an expansion of the green bond market is not what we want. It's not the aim, it's a goal. It's not a goal, it's a means. So those are two aspects that I would emphasize in sustainable finance.
Thank you for your answer, Dirk. And are there other questions? Yeah, I don't see other questions. So maybe I think we can stop here and thank Dirk very much for your talk and your provoking talk and your very interesting answer to our questions, and hope to see you again here in the future.
I will. Thank you very much for everybody for hanging in, for your patience. Feel free to send me an email if you want to read the paper, of course, and to engage. I'm very happy to do that, of course. And thanks for this opportunity.
Thanks again, and have a good evening. Bye.
On to dinner. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.